AITA for refusing to let my sister and her kids move into the house I inherited after she told everyone it was basically hers anyway. The night my mom died, my sister stood in my kitchen holding a grocery bag full of frozen casseroles people had dropped off, and the first thing she said to me after hugging me was, "You know the house should stay in the family." I remember staring at the condensation dripping down the bag onto my tile floor, trying to understand what she meant. Mom had been gone less than 12 hours. I hadn't slept. My phone was still buzzing with relatives asking about funeral arrangements. Yeah, I said because I didn't know what else to say. She nodded like we had just settled something important. At the time, I thought she was talking about memories, or tradition, or grief. I didn't realize she meant ownership. My mom's house wasn't huge. 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom that had been renovated in the late 90s and then never touched again, squeaky oak floors that groaned in the hallway, and a backyard that flooded every spring because the drainage sloped wrong. But it sat on a corner lot in a suburb where prices had gone insane in the last decade. Families walked their dogs past it like they were touring a museum of starter homes they could never afford. I grew up there. So did my sister Dana. But Dana moved out at 19, got married at 22, and stayed gone. I stayed through community college, stayed through my first job, stayed when mom's arthritis got worse and she couldn't keep up with the stairs or the yard. When mom got sick 2 years ago, it was me who drove her to chemo at 6 a.m. Me who learned how to change the settings on the oxygen machine. Me who sat on the edge of her bed while she apologized for being a burden. Dana visited. She brought her kids. She brought noise and juice boxes and stories about school fundraisers and how expensive everything was now. Then she left and texted me later asking how mom seemed. I never resented her for it. She had 2 kids and a husband who worked construction and hours that changed every week. I was single. I had flexibility. That's what I told myself. After the funeral, the lawyer read the will in a beige office that smelled like burnt coffee. I remember the hum of fluorescent lights and Dana's youngest kicking the leg of the chair in front of him over and over until Dana hissed his name. Mom left the house to me. Everything else was split evenly. Her savings, what little retirement she had left, her jewelry, the old Buick. Dana didn't say anything right away. She just stared at the table, her lips pressed together. I felt a weird, hollow guilt settle into my stomach. I hadn't asked for this. I hadn't expected it. The lawyer slid the papers toward me and explained that mom had added an addendum 6 months before she died. It said the house was left to me in recognition of caregiving and residence. Dana's husband, Mark, let out a slow breath through his nose. Not loud, but loud enough. In the parking lot afterward, Dana finally spoke. "I mean, I get it," she said, not looking at me. "You were here." I nodded, unsure what response wouldn't sound defensive. She adjusted her purse strap. "It's just, the kids grew up here too." "They visited," I said before I could stop myself. Her face changed. Not dramatically, just a tightening around the eyes. "Right," she said, "visited. We hugged goodbye, stiff and careful, like distant relatives instead of sisters. That was 3 months ago. Since then, I've been trying to figure out what to do with a house that feels too full and too empty at the same time. I still expect to hear mom coughing in the morning. I still catch myself buying the yogurt she liked, even though I hate it. I work from home doing medical billing, so the quiet is constant. Some days it's peaceful, other days it presses on my chest. 2 weeks ago, Dana started texting more often. At first, it was normal stuff, photos of the kids, complaints about grocery prices, a meme about middle child energy. Then one night she asked, "Have you thought about what you're doing with the house long term?" I stared at the message for a long time before typing back, "Staying here for now?" She responded with a thumbs up. The next day, she sent a link to an article about rising property taxes, then one about the cost of home maintenance. Then, "It must be a lot for one person." I didn't respond to that one. 3 days later, she called while I was folding laundry. "I didn't want to text this," she said. "It feels weird over text." My stomach tightened. She explained that their landlord was selling the duplex they were renting. They had 60 days to leave. "We've been looking," she said, "but everything is either too small or way out of our price range. The kids would have to change schools." I sat on the edge of my bed, holding a warm towel in my lap. "That's awful," I said, once she was quiet for a second. "Yeah, it is." I could hear one of the kids shouting in the background and the muffled sound of a TV. Then she said it. "I mean, you have 3 bedrooms?" I didn't speak. "We wouldn't need forever," she rushed on. "Just until we get back on our feet. 6 months, maybe a year. The kids could stay in their school district. And it's mom's house. It would mean a lot to them." My chest felt tight, like the air in the room had thickened. "I don't know," I said carefully. "I've barely figured out living here alone." Silence stretched between us. Then her voice changed, softer but sharper at the edges. "Well," she said, "it kind of feels like the house was meant to help the family." I didn't answer. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, the towel cooling in my hands. I'm wondering why I felt like I had just done something wrong. The next morning, my aunt texted me. "Dana told me what's going on. You're a good sister. I know you'll do the right thing." I hadn't agreed to anything. By that afternoon, 2 cousins had messaged me about keeping the house in the family. That evening, Dana posted a photo on Facebook of her kids playing in mom's old backyard from last summer with the caption, "Home is where family takes care of each other." I stared at the post until the screen dimmed, and for the first time since the will was read, I started to feel like the house didn't belong to me at all. The comments started piling up under Dana's post within minutes. "Family first. Those babies deserve stability. So lucky to have a place filled with love." I told myself it wasn't about me. She hadn't tagged me. She hadn't said anything specific, but my phone buzzed nonstop with relatives reacting to the photo, and every vibration felt like pressure. I tried to focus on work. I opened an insurance claim, typed in codes, double-checked numbers, and realized I had entered the same patient ID 3 times. My hands were shaking. Around noon, Dana texted again. Did you think about what we talked about? I set the phone face down on the desk and stared at the wall. The paint near the vent was slightly bubbled from years of humidity. I remembered Mom saying she'd fix it when things settled down. Things never settled down. I didn't respond. At 1:17 p.m., she sent, "We only have 53 days now." At 1:22, "Mark is stressing." At 1:30, "The kids overheard us talking and they're scared." I pressed my palms into my eyes until I saw sparks of light. At 2:05, my aunt called. I let it ring once, twice, then picked up. "Sweetheart," she said gently, the way people talk when they're already on someone else's side. "I heard Dana might need a little help." I swallowed. "She told you that?" "She's worried," my aunt said. "And you know how expensive everything is now. It wouldn't be forever." I could hear dishes clinking on her end, the familiar background noise of her kitchen. "I just lost Mom," I said. "I'm still adjusting." "I know," she said quickly. "And no one is minimizing that, but this is what families do. They lean on each other." Lean. The word felt heavier than it should. After we hung up, I walked through the house room by room, like I was seeing it through someone else's eyes. Mom's bedroom still smelled faintly like lavender lotion. Her closet door was half open, and her slippers tucked neatly beside the bed like she might slide into them any minute. The spare room held stacked storage bins and the sewing machine she never let anyone touch. My room, now mine alone, was the only space that felt lived in. I tried to imagine Dana's kids here. Backpacks dropped in the hallway, toys on the floor, cartoons blaring at 7 a.m., sticky fingerprints on the fridge. The image didn't make me angry. It made me feel like I was disappearing. That evening, Dana called again. I almost didn't answer, but I knew if I didn't, the silence would become another accusation. "Hey," she said, voice tight. "Did you get my messages?" "Yeah." "So?" I walked to the kitchen sink and watched water run over a plate I wasn't really washing. "I need time to think," I said. She exhaled sharply. Time is exactly what we don't have." "I understand that," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "But this is a big change." "It's temporary," she insisted. "We'd help with utilities, groceries. We're not freeloaders." "I didn't say you were." Another silence, thicker this time. Then she said quieter, "Do you even want the house?" The question landed like a slap. "What?" "You always talked about moving to the city," she said. "Starting fresh. You stayed for Mom, which was amazing. But now you could sell, split the money, and both of us could actually get ahead." There it was, not just a place to stay, an exit plan. "I'm not selling the house," I said. Her voice hardened. "So you'd rather live here alone than help your nieces and nephews stay in their school?" "That's not fair." "What's not fair is acting like you earned it," she snapped. "It came, it's Mom's house." Guilt surged up my throat so fast I felt dizzy. "I took care of her," I said, the words coming out smaller than I intended. "And I didn't," she shot back. "I brought the kids every week. I called her every day." "You visited," I said, then closed my eyes, regretting it instantly. She went quiet. When she spoke again, her voice was cold and controlled. "Wow." "I didn't mean—" "No, you did." A pause. "Forget it. We'll figure something else out." She hung up. I stood at the sink, hands dripping, listening to the hollow hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock above the doorway. The house felt suddenly enormous and accusing. 10 minutes later, Mark texted me for the first time in years. "Didn't expect you to leave my kids without a home?" I stared at the message until the screen blurred. I didn't reply. By bedtime, and Dana had changed her Facebook post caption to, "Hard times show you who your real support system is?" People reacted with angry emojis, crying faces, comments about loyalty and betrayal. No one tagged me. They didn't have to. I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan turning in slow, uneven circles, replaying the conversation over and over. Every version ended with me feeling like I'd failed some invisible test. At 3 a.m., I got up and walked to the hallway. The floorboards creaked in the same places they had since I was a kid. I rested my hand on the wall outside Mom's room. "I don't know what the right thing is," I whispered into the dark. The house, as always, said nothing. The next morning, I opened my phone to a message from Dana that was just one line. "We have a showing tonight. If we lose this place before we find another, why, we'll have nowhere to go." I typed and erased 3 different responses. Before I could send anything, another text appeared. "This wouldn't be happening if Mom had been fair." I sat there, the phone heavy in my hand, realizing the conversation wasn't about space anymore. It was about what she believed I owed her, and I had no idea how to pay a debt I never agreed to. I didn't respond to Dana's last message. I told myself it was because anything I said would make it worse. But the truth was, I didn't know what to say that wouldn't sound like a refusal or an admission of guilt. The showing at their duplex was that evening. I kept checking my phone like I was waiting for test results. Around 7:40 p.m., and Dana texted, they had 6 people come through. At 8:12, landlord says offer likely by tomorrow. At 9:03, kids keep asking where we're going. I typed, "I'm sorry you're dealing with this," and erased it. It sounded hollow, like I was standing at a distance, watching. Instead, I wrote, "I hope it works out." She didn't reply. The next morning, my cousin Erica sent me a screenshot from a family group chat I'd muted years ago. Dana, "We may be homeless in 45 days. Aunt Carol, "That is unbelievable." Uncle Ray, "What about your mom's place?" Dana, "Ask my sister." Erica followed the screenshot with, "Just thought you should know what's being said." I stared at the 3 gray dots under Erica's name, waiting for her to add something else. Reassurance? Neutrality? Anything. They disappeared. I put my phone down and tried to work. But my chest felt tight and my shoulders were locked up around my ears. At lunchtime, I made a grilled cheese and didn't eat it. I sat at the table staring at the empty chair where Mom used to sit, folding her napkin in half before every meal like it was a ritual. I could hear Dana's voice in my head. The kids would have to change schools. Mark's text. Didn't expect you to leave my kids without a home? My aunt. You're a good sister. I know you'll do the right thing. I started wondering what the right thing actually was. Letting them move in might be chaos and resentment and crowded mornings and never feeling like I had space to breathe. Saying no might mean watching my sister struggle and knowing I had extra rooms sitting empty. Neither option felt clean. That afternoon, my neighbor, Mrs. Hargrove, knocked on the door. She was in her 70s and had lived across the street since before we moved in. I saw Dana's car last week, she said when I opened the door. Thought maybe she was staying. No, I said. Just visiting? She studied my face a moment too long. Your mother would want this house full of life. I nodded politely, even though I wasn't sure she knew what she was implying. After she left, I sat on the couch and stared at the indentation in the cushion where Mom used to sit during Jeopardy. Full of life, or full of noise and expectations, and a constant reminder that the house wasn't really mine. At 4:30, Dana called. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in me felt tired of avoiding it. Her voice sounded strained, like she'd been crying but didn't want me to know. They accepted an offer, she said. We have to be out in 30 days. I closed my eyes. That's fast. That's the market, she replied. A child shouted something in the background and she muffled the phone. Stop pushing him, she hissed, then came back. Sorry. I could hear the exhaustion in her breathing. We found an apartment, she continued. 2 bedrooms, 40 minutes away. The kids would switch districts. We'd have to pull them from their after-school programs. I pressed my fingers into my temple. I'm not telling you this to guilt you, she said quickly, which made it sound exactly like she was. I just want you to understand what's happening. I do understand, I said softly. Do you? She asked. Not angry, just tired. I didn't answer. She let out a long breath. Mark thinks we should take it and be done with this. This? I repeated. This, hoping family will help. The words sat between us. I found myself staring at a small crack in the ceiling pane above the dining room archway, one I'd never noticed before. I never said I wouldn't help, I said. You didn't say you would, she replied. Silence filled the line, heavy and breathing. Finally, she said, the kids keep asking if we can live in Grandma's house. Something twisted in my chest. I told them it's complicated, she added. I swallowed. That's fair. She laughed softly, without humor. Nothing about this feels fair. After we hung up, I walked into the spare room and stood in the doorway. The afternoon light came through the blinds and thin gold lines across the carpet. Dust floated in the air, slow and weightless. I tried to picture bunk beds against the wall, plastic storage drawers, night lights. I imagined Dana in the kitchen, opening cabinets without asking, Mark's boots by the door, the constant negotiation of space, fridge shelves, laundry schedules, bathroom time. I imagined never being alone in the house where I had just learned how to be alone. Then I imagined Thanksgiving at Dana's apartment 40 minutes away. The kids quieter, the distance thicker. A story retold every year about how their aunt had 3 empty bedrooms. My phone buzzed. A text from Mark. Apartment deposit due Friday, we'll manage. No anger, no accusation, just finality. I sat on the edge of the spare room floor and leaned back against the wall, hugging my knees like I used to when I was a kid hiding from thunderstorms. The house creaked around me, pipes shifting, wood settling, the soft tick of cooling air in the vents. For the first time, I wondered if saying no would cost me more than silence at family dinners. But saying yes might cost me the only space that still felt like I could hear myself think, and I still didn't know which loss I was supposed to choose. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, my brain replayed possible futures like scenes from different lives. In one, the house was full, kids running down the hallway, the bathroom door always locked, someone knocking while I was on work calls, cereal boxes multiplying on the counter. In another, the house stayed quiet, but every family gathering carried an invisible tension, like a bruise no one mentioned, but everyone knew was there. At 6:12 a.m., I gave up and made coffee. The kitchen window was fogged from the cold outside, and when I wiped it with my sleeve, the street came into view in soft gray light. A dog walker passed, breath visible in the air. Normal morning things. The world moving forward whether I figured this out or not. At 7:03, Dana texted, Kids asked again if we can live there. I stared at the message until the coffee in my mug went cold. I typed, I'm thinking, and erased it. At 7:45, my Aunt Carol left me a voicemail. I didn't listen to it right away, but the transcription preview read, Your mother believed in keeping family close. I deleted it without pressing play. Work was impossible. I kept opening accounts and forgetting what I was doing. Around 10 a.m., I emailed my supervisor and said I wasn't feeling well. She responded with, Take the day. Grief doesn't run on a schedule. I cried harder at that than anything else. By late morning, and I was sitting on the living room floor surrounded by old photo boxes I'd pulled from the hall closet. I hadn't planned to open them. It just happened. There was one of Dana at age 9 holding a science fair ribbon, her grin gap-toothed and triumphant. One of me at 14, scowling at the camera in a band t-shirt I thought made me look tough. Mom in the background of almost every shot, mid-laugh, mid-sentence, alive in ways my memory had already started smoothing over. At the bottom of one box, I found an envelope labeled in Mom's looping handwriting. House stuff. Inside were receipts from repairs, warranty papers, a yellowed mortgage statement from 1998, and a folded sheet of notebook paper. I didn't recognize the handwriting at first, then I realized it was mine, from years ago. Probably high school or early college. Then it was a list titled, Things to Fix Someday. Paint hallway, replace bathroom fan, fix yard drainage, refinish floors, new mailbox. At the bottom, in Mom's handwriting, she had added, "Only if you stay." I sat there on the carpet staring at those 3 words. Only if you stay. At 12:30 p.m., Dana called. I let it ring once, then answered. "Hey," she said, sounding cautious. "Hey. I know things got tense," she said. "I don't want us to fight." "I don't either." There was a pause, like we were both choosing our next words carefully. "We paid the application fee for the apartment," she said. "We'll know by tomorrow." My chest tightened. "Okay. If we get it, we'll take it," she added quickly. "I can't keep the kids in limbo." "I understand." Silence stretched. I could hear one of the kids laughing in the background, a bright, but normal sound that made everything feel heavier. Then she said, quieter, "I didn't mean what I said about Mom not being fair." I swallowed. "I didn't mean to imply you didn't care about her." Another pause. Something softer settled between us. "This just hurts," she said. "I know." We stayed on the line without speaking for a few seconds, like we used to when we were teenagers and neither of us wanted to hang up first. Then she cleared her throat. "Mark thinks we should stop talking about the house. It's making everything worse." "Maybe he's right," I said. She let out a breath that sounded like relief mixed with resignation. "Maybe." After we hung up, I felt a strange, hollow calm. Not peace. More like the quiet after you realize a storm has moved somewhere else and you're left with the debris. At 2 p.m., my Mark texted, "Sorry for what I said earlier this week. Stress." I typed back, "I get it." At 3:15, my neighbor's lawn service roared to life next door, the sound vibrating through the walls. I stood in the hallway and looked at the 3 closed bedroom doors. I realized something I hadn't said out loud to anyone. I was afraid that if they moved in, they might never leave. Not because they were manipulative or lazy. They weren't. They worked hard. Life was just expensive and unpredictable and full of emergencies that reset your progress back to zero. One setback turned 6 months into 2 years before anyone notices. And then what? Do I evict my sister? The thought made my stomach twist. At 5:40 p.m., Dana texted, "Apartment approved." I sat down slowly on the couch. "They need deposit by Friday," she added. "On and move in March 1st. I stared at the message, waiting for the surge of relief I thought I would feel. Instead, something else spread through my chest. Not quite sadness, not quite relief. Something closer to grief reshaping itself. I typed, "I'm glad you have a place." 3 dots appeared. Disappeared, appeared again. "Me too," she wrote. A minute later, "Kids are sad to leave the neighborhood." Another pause. Then, "They still love Grandma's house." I set the phone on the coffee table and leaned my head back, staring at the ceiling fan spinning its slow, uneven circle. Outside, a car door slammed. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked. The house felt exactly as it had yesterday. Quiet, worn, familiar, but the decision had shifted without me making it. And I couldn't tell if I had protected my boundaries, or just let something fragile between us crack in a way that might never fit back together the same way again. The next week moved with a strange, suspended feeling, like everything was happening slightly outside of me. Dana and Mark signed the lease. The deposit drained most of what they had set aside. Dana mentioned offhand that they'd put the rest on a credit card and would figure it out. She said it lightly, but I heard the calculation behind it. I told myself this was good. They had a place. The kids would be safe. Life would continue. But the quiet in the house no longer felt neutral. It felt like an outcome. On Wednesday evening, I drove over to their duplex to drop off a box of Mom's old baking pans Dana had asked for. The February air was sharp and metallic. Omime in the sky had that dull gray color that makes everything look unfinished. The living room was half-packed. Cardboard boxes were stacked along the wall with black marker labels. Winter clothes, school papers, kitchen mitts. A strip of lighter paint on the wall showed where their couch had been for years. The kids were on the floor sorting toys into piles. The oldest looked up and smiled at me. "Mom says we might have bunk beds," he announced, like he was trying the idea on for size. "That could be fun," I said, forcing a smile. Dana came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on her jeans. Her face looked thinner than it had a month ago, shadows under her eyes like smudged fingerprints. "You didn't have to drive these over," she said, taking the box. "I was heading this way," I lied. Mark nodded from the hallway where he was dismantling a bookshelf. "Hey." We stood there for a second, an awkward triangle of shared history and unspoken things. "I can help pack," I offered. Dana shook her head quickly. "No, you've done enough." The words weren't sharp, but they landed that way. I crouched down beside the kids instead, helping match puzzle pieces that were clearly from 3 different sets. The youngest leaned against my arm like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Can we still visit Grandma's house?" she asked. My throat tightened. "Of course." She seemed satisfied with that and returned to sorting plastic animals into a shoebox. In the kitchen, I overheard Dana and Mark talking in low voices. "Maxed already," Mark murmured. "I know," Dana replied. I'll pick up extra shifts once we're settled." A cabinet door closed harder than necessary. I focused on fitting 2 puzzle pieces together that didn't belong. When I left an hour later, Dana walked me to the door. The porch light buzzed overhead. "I meant what I said," she said quietly. "About not wanting to fight." "I know." She crossed her arms against the cold. "I just wish things had gone differently." I nodded, because there was nothing else to do. On the drive home, I realized she hadn't said what differently meant. The next few days were a blur of small, heavy updates. Dana texting photos of paint scuffs in the new apartment. A picture of the kids eating pizza on the floor because the table wouldn't fit in the moving truck until the second trip. A message at 11:48 p.m. "They're finally asleep." I responded when I could, and keeping my words neutral and supportive. Each exchange felt like stepping carefully on thin ice. Saturday morning, I went to the grocery store and instinctively bought the cereal her kids liked. I didn't realize it until I was putting bags in the trunk. I sat there staring at the bright cartoon box and felt something twist inside my chest. I kept it anyway. That afternoon, my Aunt Carol called again. "I hear they're moving today," she said. "Tomorrow," I corrected. She sighed. "Such a shame. Your mother loved having everyone under one roof." I gripped the phone tighter. "Mom also loved having a quiet cup of coffee without stepping on Legos." She paused, surprised, then laughed lightly like I'd made a harmless joke. "Well, families adapt." After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table and realized my hands were shaking again. My Sunday was moving day. Dana hadn't asked for help, but I drove over anyway with coffee and a box of donuts. The apartment complex was 40 minutes away, just like she'd said. Beige buildings, narrow parking spaces, a playground with faded plastic slides. Mark was carrying a mattress up the stairs when I arrived. He looked exhausted, his t-shirt dark with sweat despite the cold. "You didn't have to come," he said, though his shoulders relaxed a fraction. "I brought caffeine," I said, holding up the tray. Dana accepted a cup like it might keep her upright. The kids ran back and forth between the car and the apartment, thrilled by the chaos. Inside, the space felt tight but functional. 2 bedrooms, low ceilings, the faint smell of fresh paint failing to hide older odors underneath. "This is the boys' room," Dana said, pushing open a door where 2 mattresses lay side by side on the floor. "We'll figure out beds later." She said it briskly, efficiently, like if she kept moving, she wouldn't have to feel anything. I helped unpack kitchen boxes, lining up mismatched plates and narrow cabinets. We worked around each other without talking much. At one point, our hands bumped reaching for the same mug, and we both pulled back too quickly. By late afternoon, the sun slanted through the blinds, striping the carpet in pale gold. The kids sat cross-legged in the living room, eating fast food burgers, grease soaking through the paper wrappers. "Can we sleep here tonight?" the youngest asked. Dana smiled, tired but real. "Yeah, this is home now." I stood in the doorway, unsure whether to feel relieved or like I was witnessing something fragile being forced into shape. When I finally left, Dana hugged me tightly. Not stiff, not careful, just tired and human. "Thank you for coming," she said into my shoulder. "Always," I replied, and meant it. The drive back felt longer in the dark. When I pulled into my driveway, the house sat in silence, its windows reflecting the porch light like blank eyes. Inside, everything was exactly where I'd left it. No backpacks on the floor, no voices echoing down the hallway, no smell of fast food or fresh paint. I set my keys on the counter and stood there listening to the quiet settle around me. For weeks, the house had felt like a question. Now it felt like an answer I wasn't sure I knew how to live with. The first Sunday after they moved, I woke up later than usual and didn't recognize the feeling in my chest. It wasn't dread. It wasn't relief. It was just space. I made coffee and carried the mug to the back door, sliding it open despite the cold. The yard was damp from overnight frost. The grass flattened in places where winter had pressed it down. Mom used to say the yard looked its worst right before spring. I stood there in my socks, breathing in air that smelled faintly like wet dirt and distant chimney smoke, and realized I hadn't heard from Dana since Friday night when she texted, "We survived day 1. I had replied with a thumbs up and a heart. It felt insufficient, but also safer than words. By noon, I started cleaning, not because the house was dirty, but because movement felt better than thinking. I wiped baseboards, sorted the junk drawer, and finally boxed up the stack of unopened sympathy cards still sitting on the dining room sideboard. Most were signed with variations of "thinking of you" and "she was a wonderful woman." I couldn't throw them away yet, so I stacked them neatly in the hall closet. While vacuuming the spare room, I found a small plastic dinosaur under the radiator. One of the kids must have dropped it last summer. I turned it over in my hand, the tail bent slightly from being stepped on. I set it on the windowsill instead of putting it away. At 2:14 p.m., Dana texted, "Kids start school tomorrow." I responded, "How are they feeling?" A few minutes passed. "Nervous?" she wrote. "Excited about new playground." Then after another pause, 40-minute commute is brutal. I pictured her loading backpacks into the car before sunrise, navigating traffic, calculating gas costs in her head. "Call me if you need anything," I typed. The 3 dots appeared. I disappeared, appeared again. "Thank you," she sent. That was all. The next week settled into a rhythm. She texted photos of packed lunches at 6 a.m., complaining about missing socks and permission slips. I sent back encouragement and occasional jokes about cafeteria pizza being a universal childhood experience. We did not talk about the house. Family group chats went quiet on the subject too. The urgency had passed, replaced by the practical realities of rent payments and morning alarms. My aunt's messages shifted to recipes and church bake sales. It was like everyone had agreed, without saying it, to step around the fracture. One evening, about 2 weeks later, Dana called while I was folding laundry. "I'm in the parking lot," she said. "I just needed to sit in silence for 5 minutes." I could hear the car engine idling. How was today?" I asked. She laughed softly. "One kid forgot his lunch, one cried because the math homework looked different, and I realized the dishwasher doesn't actually dry anything. That sounds like a full day." She exhaled. "It's fine. We're adjusting." There was a pause, then she added, "They miss the old neighborhood, but they like the new park." I leaned against the dryer, warm clothes draped over my arm. "Kids adapt faster than adults," I said. "Yeah," she replied. "Probably true." Silence settled, but it wasn't heavy this time. "Hey," she said after a moment. "Are you okay there alone?" The question surprised me. "I think so," I said honestly. "Some days are harder, but I'm figuring it out." She was quiet long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then she said, "Mom would be proud of you." My throat tightened. She'd be proud of you too." We didn't linger on it. We didn't need to. As winter began loosening its grip, small changes appeared around the house. Longer light in the afternoons, the faintest hint of green pushing through the lawn. The hallway didn't feel quite as dim at 5 p.m. I fixed the bathroom fan one Saturday, balancing on a step stool with a YouTube tutorial playing on my phone. When it finally hummed to life, I laughed out loud. The sound startling in the empty room. Only if you stay. I thought about that note more often than I expected. Staying, I realized, didn't have to mean staying frozen. It could mean choosing what this place became next. In early March, Dana brought the kids over for dinner. She texted first. "We'll keep it low, chaos." They arrived with a store-bought salad and a nervous energy that softened as the kids dropped their backpacks by the door like they'd never stopped doing it. Their voices filled the hallway, echoing off the walls, not overwhelming, just alive. We ate at the dining room table. The youngest spilled milk. Mark wiped it up with a paper towel and an apologetic shrug. Dana looked around the kitchen like she was reacquainting herself with something familiar, but no longer hers. After dinner, the kids ran into the backyard, their laughter floating through the open door into the cool evening air. Dana stood beside me at the sink, drying dishes. "It feels the same," she said quietly. "It does," I replied. She set a plate in the rack. I'm glad you stayed." I wasn't sure if she meant tonight or in general. "Me too," I said. We stood there listening to the kids outside and the distant hum of traffic beyond the neighborhood. Nothing was fully resolved. The distance between our homes was real. The financial strain she carried hadn't vanished. The house was still mine, and the decision I'd made, or allowed to happen, still shaped the space between us. But something fragile had shifted from fracture to seam. Not invisible. Not perfect. Just held together, carefully, by the choice to keep showing up. When they left that night, the quiet returned, but it no longer felt like an accusation. It felt like a pause. And for the first time since the lawyer slid the will across the desk, I understood that boundaries and love were not opposites. And they were the shape of what we were still learning how to be. Spring arrived slowly, like it wasn't entirely sure it was welcome. The yard stayed patchy for weeks before green finally pushed through in uneven streaks. The maple tree in the front produced sticky buds that coated the sidewalk, and for the first time since Mom died, I caught myself noticing the house the way a stranger might. The sagging gutter over the porch, the mailbox that leaned slightly to the left, the paint on the shutters fading to a tired gray blue. Instead of feeling overwhelmed, I made a list. Not the old list I'd written as a teenager, full of someday intentions, but a practical one. Clean gutters, reseal the back steps, call someone about the drainage before summer storms. My small acts of maintenance that felt less like preserving the past and more like claiming the present. Dana and I settled into a rhythm that felt cautious but real. She called during commutes. I texted the kids corny jokes. Mark sent me a photo one Saturday morning of the boys assembling a secondhand bunk bed with the caption, "Still standing." I sent back a thumbs up and a hammer emoji, which made him reply, "High praise." We still didn't talk about those weeks after the will, not directly, but the sharpness had dulled into something more manageable, like a scar you notice in certain lighting but don't touch. Easter came and went. They hosted at their apartment because the kids wanted to show off their new rooms. The space was tight, folding chairs borrowed from neighbors. I am plastic eggs scattered across a shared patch of grass near the parking lot. Dana moved through it all with an efficiency that looked like resilience from the outside and exhaustion if you knew where to look. When I left that afternoon, she hugged me longer than usual. "We're okay," she said, as if she needed to hear it out loud. "I know," I said. In May, the first real storm of the season rolled through. Heavy rain pounded the roof and turned the backyard into a shallow pond within minutes. I stood at the back door watching water creep toward the patio and thought about the drainage Mom had put off fixing for 20 years. I took photos and texted Dana. "The yard is a lake again," she replied. "Some things never change." Then, "Need help?" I stared at the message longer than I expected to. "Maybe advice," I wrote back. "Won't Mark know anyone?" An hour later, Mark texted me a number and wrote, "Guy's fair, fix my boss's place." It was a small exchange, practical, unemotional, but it felt like trust. The work got done in early June. A trench carved along the fence line, gravel laid, soil reshaped. I stood in the yard afterward, muddy and sunburned, and watched water from the hose run cleanly toward the new drain. It felt like solving a problem that had outlived the person who first noticed it. That night, I sat on the back steps eating takeout and realized the house no longer felt like a monument to loss. It felt like something in motion. Summer brought longer visits. The kids came over to swim in the neighbor's pool and ended up staying for popsicles and board games. Dana would sit at the kitchen table, scrolling through work emails while I packed leftovers into containers for her to take home. Mark helped me replace the leaning mailbox one Saturday morning without making it a big deal. We didn't pretend nothing had happened. We just stopped letting it define every interaction. In late July, Dana and I found ourselves alone in the living room while the kids chased fireflies outside. The windows were open, warm air drifting through the screens. "I was really angry," she said suddenly, not looking at me. "I know," I replied. "I felt like you got something that belonged to both of us," she admitted. "And I didn't know where to put that feeling." I watched a moth bounce softly against the porch light. "I felt like if I gave in, I'd disappear," I said. "Yeah, and I hated that I even thought that." She nodded slowly. "We were both scared." "Yeah." We sat in the quiet that followed, the kind that comes after truth rather than avoidance. "I don't think Mom meant to put us in that position," she said. "I don't think she knew how not to," I answered. Dana let out a breath that sounded like release. Outside, the kids shouted in triumph over a captured lightning bug. Life, insistent and ordinary, moved forward. By September, the 40-minute drive had become routine for her. The kids talked about new friends. Mark's hours stabilized. The credit card balance still loomed, but it was shrinking. At the house, the maple leaves began their slow turn toward red. I repainted the shutters on a cool Saturday morning, music playing through an open window. the smell of fresh paint sharp and clean. Mrs. Me Hargrove shuffled across the street to inspect the progress. Looks like someone's planning to stay, she said approvingly. I smiled. Looks that way. That evening, after the paint dried, I sat on the porch steps watching the light fade across the neighborhood. A couple walked their dog. Somewhere down the block, someone laughed. The house behind me creaked softly as it cooled. The same sounds I'd known my whole life. It was still full of memories. Still imperfect. Still mine. And not mine alone, in the ways that mattered. A year earlier, I thought inheritance meant ownership, control, responsibility. What I understand now is that it also meant choosing where to draw lines and where to leave doors open. Accepting that love can include distance. That helping doesn't always mean surrendering space. That saying no doesn't have to mean losing each other. The porch light flickered on automatically as dusk settled. I sat there a while longer, listening to the steady, ordinary sounds of evening, feeling the weight of the past year not as a burden, but as something carried and learned from. The house no longer felt like a question I had to answer. It felt like a place I had chosen, imperfectly, deliberately, to remain. And for the first time, that choice felt like enough. A year passed without me noticing the exact moment it happened. Not the anniversary of Mom's death. That day came and went with a quiet heaviness and a small vase of grocery store flowers on the kitchen table. But the slow accumulation of ordinary days that stopped feeling like recovery and started feeling like living. By the following winter, the house had settled into a rhythm that belonged to me. Mornings with coffee at the back door, even when it was too cold to open it. Work calls taken from the small desk I'd moved near the window for better light. Evenings where the quiet felt earned instead of imposed. The spare room became something other than storage. I kept a pull-out couch for when the kids stayed over, but I also set up a small sewing table with Mom's machine. The first time I threaded it, my hand shook so badly I had to stop twice. The hum of the motor sounded exactly like it had when she used it, and for a second I had to sit back and breathe through the wave of memory that came with it. Only if you stay. I stayed. And I changed things anyway. Dana's family adjusted in ways that were subtle but real. The kids learned the new commute landmarks. Mine, they argued about whose turn it was to take out trash in an apartment where the dumpster was a short walk instead of a backyard bin. Dana picked up extra shifts for a while, then cut back once the credit card balance stopped keeping her awake at night. Mark started doing weekend side jobs for neighbors, small repairs that turned into word-of-mouth work. They were still tired, still stretched, still figuring things out, but they were steady. We developed new traditions without announcing them as such. Sunday dinners rotated between the apartment and my house. If they hosted, we sat elbow to elbow around a too-small table. If I hosted, the kids spread homework across the dining room while Dana graded papers or answered emails and Mark tinkered with whatever needed fixing. The house no longer felt like contested ground. Mine felt like a shared reference point, not possession, not obligation, but something we returned to. In early spring, the youngest asked if she could plant flowers in the backyard so Grandma can see them. We stood together at the edge of the patio, poking holes into the damp soil. She chose bright marigolds and purple petunias because they were the loudest colors at the garden center. Her small hands pressed dirt around the roots with solemn care. They'll come back every year? She asked. Some will, I said. Some won't, but we can plant more. She nodded, satisfied with that answer. Later, when the first blooms opened, Dana texted me a photo she'd taken during one of their visits. They're impossible to ignore, she wrote. Neither of us said what we were really acknowledging. The summer brought heat that settled thick and slow over the neighborhood. The repaired drainage held through heavy storms. The mailbox stayed straight. The maple tree cast a wide circle of shade across the front lawn, where the kids lay on their backs one afternoon counting cloud shapes. Looks like a dragon, the oldest insisted. It's obviously a shoe, the younger argued. Dana sat beside me on the porch steps, both of us too warm to move. Remember when we used to do this? She asked. Yeah, I said. Before bills and jobs and everything? She nudged my shoulder. You always saw dinosaurs in the clouds. I had range, I said. She laughed, and it sounded like something from before either of us knew what adult decisions would cost. We never revisited the idea of them moving in. It existed as a path we hadn't taken, one that had shaped us precisely because we chose differently. Sometimes I wondered what would have happened if I had said yes immediately. Would resentment have crept in through small daily frictions? Would Dana have felt beholden instead of supported? Would I have lost the fragile sense of self I was rebuilding after caregiving and grief? There was no way to know. What I did know was that the boundary I set, clumsy, painful, imperfect, forced all of us to confront realities we might have otherwise avoided. Money, space, expectations, the difference between help and dependency, the ways love can coexist with limits. In October, on a cool evening that smelled faintly of wood smoke, Dana and I sat at the kitchen table after everyone else had gone home. She traced a finger along a faint scratch in the wood surface. Oh, I used to think fairness meant everything being split exactly down the middle, she said. I used to think fairness meant no one being disappointed, I replied. She looked up at me. Turns out that's not a real option. No, I said, it isn't. We sat with that truth, not as a wound, but as something understood. When she left, the house returned to its familiar quiet. I washed the last dish, turned off the kitchen light, and stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to the soft settling sounds in the walls. The grief hadn't disappeared. It had changed shape. It lived now in small moments, catching the scent of lavender in a store aisle, hearing a song Mom used to hum, seeing marigolds blaze bright against dark soil. The guilt had changed too. It no longer sat heavy on my chest. It surfaced occasionally. Then a whisper asking if I could have done more, given more, been more. And each time, I answered it with the life we were living now. Not perfect, not painless, but honest. On the 1-year anniversary of the day the will was read, I took the afternoon off work and repainted the front door. A deep, quiet green that looked almost black in the shade and glowed warm in the sun. When I stepped back to look at it, the house felt subtly different. Not new, not transformed, but claimed. Mrs. Hargrove walked by with her grocery cart and stopped to admire it. Your mother liked green, she said. I smiled. I know. That evening, Dana texted, Door looks good. Feels like you? I stood on the porch, phone in hand, the late light stretching long shadows across the yard. For a long time, I thought keeping the house meant holding on to the past exactly as it was. Then I thought it meant defending it like territory. Somewhere along the way, I learned it meant something quieter, choosing what to carry forward, what to let change, and how to leave space for the people you love without erasing yourself. Inside, the hallway light cast a soft glow across the floorboards, illuminating the small scuffs and worn places that decades of footsteps had left behind. I stepped through the doorway, closed the door behind me, and felt the familiar, steady stillness settle into place. Not empty, not full, just lived in, and finally, fully mine to share without giving away.